The alarm never went off at 4:47 in the morning because Robert Caldwell had never fallen asleep in the first place. He lay on top of the covers, still dressed in the same worn Wranglers and faded flannel shirt he'd put on the morning before, staring at the water stain on the bedroom ceiling that had been there since 2009 when the roof leaked during a February ice storm. He'd patched it himself back then, climbed up on that old wooden ladder in the cold tubes of caulk in his coat pocket, fingers going numb. Back when patching things still felt possible. The ceiling fan turned slowly above him, clicking on every third rotation the way it had for 15 years. Patricia used to say she'd go crazy from that clicking. He used to say he'd fix it. He never did. Now the clicking was the only sound in the room, and he'd give anything to hear her complain about it one more time. Patricia had been gone for years. Cancer. Quick and merciless. The way West Texas weather could be sunny one morning, a tornado by afternoon. Rover sat up and put his boots on the floor. The wood creaked under his weight as he walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, the land stretched flat and dark all the way to the horizon, where a faint gray line was just beginning to separate the earth from the sky. 3,800 acres, his father's land. His grandfather's land before that. The Caldwell family had worked this ground since 1931, when his great-grandfather, Winston Caldwell, arrived from Tennessee with $40, a mule, and a stubbornness that apparently ran in the blood. 3 days. That was all he had left. He walked to the kitchen and put the coffee on, then stood at the back door, looking out at the dark outlines of the barn and the old grain silo. The silo needed repainting. The barn's east wall had a growing lean to it. The fencing along the north pasture had been repaired with mismatched wire for the last 2 years because he couldn't afford the proper materials. Every corner of this place told the same story. A man holding on by his fingernails, patching, enduring, and praying that one more season would turn things around. It hadn't turned around. The coffee maker gurgled and spit. He poured a mug and sat down at the kitchen table where an open envelope lay next to the salt shaker. He didn't need to read the letter inside again. He had it memorized. First Lone Star Bank, Abilene Division. Final notice of foreclosure proceedings. Outstanding balance, $2,347,000. Oh. Deadline for resolution, April 30th. 3 days. The debt hadn't happened all at once. That was the thing people didn't understand about financial ruin. It didn't come crashing down like a wall. It seeped in, slow and quiet, like water under a door. It started with the drought of 2019, when rainfall dropped to 11 inches for the year and his wheat yields collapsed. He'd taken out an emergency loan to cover operating costs and seed for the next season. Reasonable. A lot of farmers did it. Then 2020 brought the pandemic and commodity prices went sideways. Then 2021 brought another dry year. Then his John Deere 9,620 combine broke down during harvest, a $40,000 repair, and he'd had to borrow again to cover it and still pay his workers. Then the bank refinanced at a higher rate. Then the small amount of cattle he'd been running lost 3 dozen head to a virus that spread through the county before anyone knew what it was. Each setback by itself was survivable. Together, they had compounded into a number that made Robert's stomach drop every time he looked at it. $2,347,000. Oh, he was 58 years old and he had nothing left. The farm equipment had liens on it. The truck had a payment 6 weeks behind. His checking account held $1,847, which wouldn't cover the property taxes that were also overdue. His son, Marcus, had offered to help, had begged to help. Actually, but Marcus lived in Austin with a young family and a mortgage of his own. Robert had refused every time. A man didn't drag his children into his failures. That was how he saw it, his failure. His alone. He drank his coffee in the dark and watched the sky turn from gray to pale orange. A mockingbird started up somewhere near the fence line, running through its repertoire of stolen songs. Robert listened to it and thought about his father, Gerald Caldwell, who used to say that mockingbirds were the most honest, dishonest creatures God ever made. They sang other bird songs but meant every note of it. Gerald Caldwell had been a hard man. Proud, silent, demanding, and achingly devoted to this land. He'd expanded the farm from the original 900 acres his own father had homesteaded, buying up neighboring parcels through the 1970s and 1980s when he could. He'd built the barn, the second equipment shed, and the modest brick house where Robert now sat drinking coffee alone. He'd handed Robert the keys on a Tuesday morning in 1994 and said, "Don't lose what we built." Robert had not intended to lose it. He set the mug down and went outside into the cool April morning. The air smelled of dry grass and something faintly sweet. Maybe the mesquite starting to bloom along the fence line. He walked the perimeter of the yard out of habit, checking things the way he always did. Even now, when the checking felt like a kind of torture, the garden Patricia had planted along the south side of the house had gone mostly to weeds. He'd kept a strip of it going. Some tomatoes, some peppers, but it wasn't what it used to be when she tended it. Nothing was what it used to be. He stopped at the edge of the yard where a wooden cross stood, planted in the ground, painted white, with the name Biscuit carved into the crosspiece. Their old border collie, gone 3 years now. Patricia had cried harder over that dog than Robert had ever seen her cry over anything else, which had made him love her even more, because it meant she was the kind of woman who felt things completely. He stood there for a moment, then turned and looked back at the house. Brick exterior, green metal roof, the porch where he and Patricia used to sit on summer evenings with sweet tea and watch the heat lightning on the horizon. The light above the front door needed a new bulb. The left shutter had come loose from its mounting and hung at a slight angle. In 3 days, none of it would be his anymore. He drove into Marston just after 8 in the morning. Marston was the kind of small Texas town that people who'd never lived in one imagined when they tried to picture small Texas towns. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a farm supply a barber shop, a post office, and a church that had a bigger parking lot than the grocery store. Population 2,800, down from 3,400 in 1990, down from 4,100 in 1970. The kind of slow bleed that nobody talked about directly, but everyone felt. He pulled into the gravel lot beside Crawford's Diner and went inside. The bell above the door announced him, and Dottie Pierce looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Robert." She was already reaching for the coffee pot. "Morning, Dottie." She was 62. Hair the color of pewter, pulled back in a practical bun. The kind of woman who'd worked the same counter for 31 years and remembered how everyone took their coffee without ever writing it down. She poured his without asking, black, no sugar, and set it on the counter. "Sit anywhere you like, hon." Slow morning. It was always a slow morning these days. He took a stool at the counter and nodded to the 2 men sitting at the far end. Bill Hutchins and Roy Sayers, both retired farmers who came in every morning with the reliability of sunrise. Bill lifted his mug in greeting. He was 71, heavy-set, wearing a cap from a seed company that had gone out of business years ago. "Boys." Robert settled on his stool. Nobody said anything about the foreclosure, but everybody knew. In a town this size, financial trouble moved through the community, the way weather moved across the plains, visible from a long way off, and there was nothing to do but watch it come. Roy Sayers cleared his throat. "You talk to anyone at the bank. Talk to everyone at the bank." Robert wrapped his hands around the mug. "Talk to their lawyers. Talk to a financial consultant in Abilene who charged me $300 to tell me what I already knew. There's that program through the USDA applied. Denied. Farm revenue didn't meet their current parameters. Whatever that means." Bill shook his head slowly. "It ain't right." "No," Robert agreed. "It ain't." Dottie set a plate of eggs and toast in front of him without being asked. He started to say he hadn't ordered, and she gave him a look that ended that conversation. He ate. The diner filled up slightly as the morning went on. A couple of younger men from the highway construction crew working the stretch of Route 84 North Ave town. A woman with 2 small children. The mail carrier, taking a break, Robert ate his eggs and listened to the ordinary sounds of the morning and tried not to think about the letter on his kitchen table. He was on his second cup of coffee when the door opened, and a man walked in who did not belong. It wasn't anything dramatic about it. The man didn't stand in the doorway or command the room. He simply came in, looked around with calm, unhurried eyes, and took a seat at the far end of the counter, 2 stools from Robert. But something about him registered immediately as different. Out of place, the way a single note played in the wrong key registers in the ear before the mind can name it. He was perhaps 60 years old, though he might have been younger and simply weathered by a specific kind of life, or older and well-preserved by another kind. Medium height, broad through the shoulders, wearing dark slacks and a gray button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms. No hat, unusual for this part of Texas. His hair was silver white, cut short and neat. His hands, resting on the counter, were large and showed the faint map of outdoor work. But his clothes and the watch on his left wrist, simple, silver-faced, expensive without announcing itself, suggested he was no longer doing that work. He looked at the laminated menu with genuine attention, as though he'd never seen one before and found it interesting. Dottie went over. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, please." And whatever those eggs were that this gentleman was having, they smelled worth trying. His voice was even not a Texas accent. Something from further north, maybe a flatness to certain vowels that made Robert think of the Midwest, though he couldn't have said why. Dottie poured the coffee and went to put in the order. The man looked down the counter at Robert. Not intrusively, just a calm acknowledgement, the way people did in small towns when they were sitting near each other. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Robert said, and that was all. For a while. The man's name, Robert, would learn it 20 minutes later, when the man extended his hand and introduced himself with the direct simplicity of someone who had nothing to prove, was Daniel Mercer. They fell into conversation the way men of a certain age sometimes do over a diner counter, not in a rush. No particular agenda, just the natural current of shared space and coffee and morning quiet. Daniel said he was passing through, looking at property in the area. Robert said there was plenty of property to look at, some of it going cheaper than it ought to. "You farm?" Daniel asked. 30 years, Robert said. "Wheat, mostly. Some cattle. Hard years lately?" "Hard years lately?" Robert agreed. There was a pause. The radio behind the counter played a George Strait song at low volume. "You from around here originally, Daniel?" "Ask it." "Born about 12 miles north of where we're sitting," Robert said. "My father farmed here. His father before him." Daniel nodded as though this information meant something to him. Not as small talk, something more considered. 3 generations, he said. "That's a significant thing." "It is," Robert said. And then, because the coffee in the morning and the 3 days hanging over him had loosened something in his chest, he added, "Might be ending with this one." He hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words came out quietly, and he looked down at his mug. Daniel didn't fill the silence with false comfort or probing questions. He sat with it for a moment, the way someone who understood loss could sit with another person's. And then he said, "I'm sorry to hear that. It was such a simple thing to say," Robert nodded. "Bank's taking it in 3 days." He didn't know why he was telling this to a stranger. Maybe because a stranger was exactly what was needed. Someone who didn't know the whole history, didn't have a face full of sympathy, that was also a face full of the town's collective witness to his failure. A stranger was just a person, just ears, and a quiet morning. "What's the farm called?" Daniel asked. "Coldwell Farm. Always has been. My great-grandfather Winston started it in 31. Daniel turned his coffee mug slowly in his hands. "Winston Caldwell," he said. The name came out deliberate, like he was placing it somewhere. Robert looked at him. "You know the name?" "I might," Daniel said. He looked up from the mug and met Robert's eyes. "What did he look like, your great-grandfather?" "Any pictures of him?" It was a strange question. Robert studied the man for a moment. "Got some." "Why?" Daniel considered for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Because I believe he said carefully, that Winston Caldwell may have done something for my family a very long time ago. And if I'm right, I think it's time someone returned the favor. Robert drove home in a state that he couldn't have named precisely. Not hope, because hope had become too expensive a thing for him to carry easily, but something adjacent to it, something unsteady and suspicious of itself. Daniel Mercer had not explained further in the diner. He'd asked for Robert's address, said he wanted to come by the farm that afternoon if Robert was willing, and that he would explain everything then. Robert had given him the address and driven home wondering if he was losing his mind. He pulled into the gravel driveway, cut the engine, and sat in the truck for a moment. The farm looked the way it always looked in the morning light, simultaneously beautiful and heartbreaking. The way things did when you loved them and were losing them. The wheat in the south field had actually come up decent this spring, green and promising, just past knee height, rippling in the light April wind. It made a sound like distant applause. Robert always liked that sound. He went inside and found the old photo albums in the hall closet. 3 of them, covered in a thin layer of dust, filled with a visual archive of the Caldwell family across 4 generations. He carried them to the kitchen table, poured fresh coffee, and began going through them looking for pictures of Winston. There were only a few. Winston Caldwell had not been a man who liked photographs. According to family history, had considered them a kind of vanity. But there were 3. One of him as a young man, maybe 25, standing in front of the original farmhouse that no longer existed, wearing overalls and squinting into the sun. One of him at what appeared to be a community gathering of some kind, standing in a group of men outside a building, less identifiable. And one of them, in his later years, maybe 60, seated on the porch steps with a young Gerald on his knee. Robert studied them. He didn't know what Daniel Mercer expected to recognize, or what connection could possibly exist between this silver-haired stranger and a man who had died in 1974. But he thought about what Daniel had said. Winston Caldwell may have done something for my family. He looked at the photograph of his great-grandfather, the lined, sun-baked face, the broad hands, the plain and unsmiling expression that was not unfriendliness, but simply the way men of that time and place presented themselves to a camera. He wondered what story was hidden in that stillness. Outside, the mockingbird was at it again. Robert closed the album, finished his coffee, and waited. Daniel Mercer's car appeared at the end of the long gravel driveway at precisely 2 in the afternoon. A dark blue Ford pickup, newer model, clean but not ostentatious. Robert watched it come from the porch, his boot heel resting on the lower rail, coffee in hand. The man parked, got out, and looked up at the house with an expression Robert couldn't quite read from a distance, something attentive, almost searching, as though he was checking the place against the description he'd been given. "Afternoon," Robert called. "Afternoon." Daniel came up the steps, and they shook hands again. His grip was firm, not performative. He looked around at the yard, the barn, the fields beyond. Beautiful piece of land. "It is," Robert said. "Come inside." They sat at the kitchen table with the photo albums between them and coffee poured. Robert slid the album with Winston's photographs across the table without comment. Daniel opened it with careful hands and found the photographs quickly, as though he'd expected them. He looked at the one of young Winston for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, with the subdued certainty of someone whose long-held theory has just been confirmed by evidence. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, that's him. You recognize him." Robert was careful to keep skepticism out of his voice, not because he wasn't skeptical, but because he'd learned that skepticism shown to early closed conversations before they could become useful. "I've seen a photograph of him before," Daniel said. He looked up. "Different photograph, one that belongs to my family, or did belong to them. My mother kept it until she passed." He paused. "Mr. Caldwell, how much do you know about your great-grandfather's life before he came to Texas?" Robert sat back. "Some. Not a lot. He didn't talk much about his past. My grandfather Gerald, his son, said Winston would change the subject when Tennessee came up. Just say it was a different life and leave it there." Daniel nodded as though this was expected. Can I tell you a story? That's what you drove out here for, I imagine. Daniel almost smiled. He folded his hands on the table and began. In the winter of 1930, in a small town in eastern Tennessee called Harlan's Crossing, a young man named Winston Caldwell was working at a sawmill. He was 23 years old, recently married, and the Depression had hit Harlan's Crossing the way it hit every small rural town, like a slow hemorrhage, steady and relentless. The sawmill was cutting hours. A lot of men were out of work entirely. One January night, there was a fire. A family called Mercer, Joseph Mercer, his wife Ellie, and their 3 children. The youngest of them, an infant, lived in a house at the edge of town. The fire started in the kitchen, likely from a stove. In the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, it moved fast. By the time the smoke woke Joseph, the kitchen and back bedroom were already gone. Joseph got his wife and the 2 older children out. He went back for the baby, but the smoke was too thick, the heat too intense, and he was forced back out. Winston Caldwell had been walking home from a late shift. He saw the glow from 3 blocks away and started running. When he arrived, he heard the infant crying inside, on the ground floor, front room, which the fire hadn't yet reached. He went through the window. He got the baby out. He was burned on his left forearm and right hand doing it. The scars, according to Daniel, had never entirely faded. Robert listened without interrupting. He was looking at the photograph of Winston in his later years, the broad hands visible on his grandson's shoulders. He couldn't see scars in the old black and white photograph. He thought about the fact that he'd never thought to look. The baby, Robert said, was my grandfather, Daniel said. Calvin Mercer. He was 8 months old. He paused. He lived to be 89 years old. He had 6 children, 14 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren, one of whom is sitting at your table right now. He looked at Robert steadily. None of us would exist if Winston Caldwell hadn't gone through that window. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the April wind moved through the wheat field with that sound like applause. My grandfather talked about it his whole life, Daniel continued. He never knew Winston personally. He was a baby, obviously. But Joseph Mercer, his father, told the story, and then Calvin told it to his children, and they told it to theirs. The man from the sawmill who went through the burning window, Winston Caldwell. He touched the photograph lightly. They tried to find him afterward to thank him properly, but he'd left Harlan's Crossing by spring. Came to Texas, apparently. Never mentioned it, Robert said. His voice was steady, but something had shifted in his chest, a kind of reverberating weight, the specific gravity of a story that connects the living to the dead in ways they hadn't known, not to anyone. My grandfather would have told us, some men were like that, Daniel said. Not out of modesty, exactly. More like they did what needed doing and considered it finished. Not a story, just a thing that happened. Robert looked at his great-grandfather's face for a long time. Then he said, "What are you proposing, Mr. Mercer?" Daniel sat back and let out a slow breath. "I'm a real estate developer, primarily based in Denver. Done well enough that I have resources available to me that most people don't." He was direct about it, not boastful. "I found out about the situation here, about the farm, the foreclosure from a cousin who lives in Abilene and follows local news. When I've heard the name Caldwell and the farm's location, I started looking into it. It took me about 2 weeks to confirm that this was the same family." He paused. "I'd like to pay off the debt." Robert didn't say anything immediately. $2.3 million, he continued. "I've already spoken with First Lone Star Bank. They've confirmed the payoff amount and the process. I can have a cashier's check to them by tomorrow morning if you agree." Robert was quiet for a long moment. A muscle worked in his jaw. "Why?" he finally said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Why now? Why not?" He stopped. He was going to say, "Why not sooner?" which was irrational, because Daniel hadn't known about it sooner. He rearranged his thoughts. "You don't know me. Your grandfather lived his life. That debt, if you want to call it a debt, was between Winston and Joseph Mercer, Two men who've been dead for 50 years. You don't owe me anything. No. Daniel agreed. I don't owe you anything. You're right about that. He met Robert's eyes. But my grandfather spent his entire life aware that he existed because of a decision a stranger made in about 30 seconds. That's a specific kind of weight to carry. He passed it on to my mother, and she passed it on to me. Not as a burden, as an awareness. He paused. And I have the means to do something about it. So, I'd like to... Robert stood up abruptly and went to the window. He stood there looking out at the wheat field, hands shoved in his pockets. He was 58 years old. He was 3 days from losing everything his family had built across nearly a century. A man he'd met 4 hours ago was offering to make that disappear with a check. The pride in him, the Gerald Caldwell iron spine pride that had been bred into him across 4 generations, was screaming. It felt like charity. It felt like being saved by someone else's money, which felt dangerously close to failure, acknowledged out loud. I don't take handouts, he said, not turning around. I know you don't, Daniel said. And I'm not offering one. Robert turned. Then, what do you call it? I'd call it, Daniel said carefully, a family completing a circle. Winston Caldwell gave my family its future. The least his family deserves is to keep theirs. The words landed somewhere deep and undefended. Robert looked at the man for a long moment, at the steady, unperformative sincerity in his face, and felt something in him crack slightly at the edges. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, Daniel said. He stood, straightened his shirt. I'm at the Pinaview Motel on Route 84. Room 7. Take whatever time you need tonight. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. But Mr. Caldwell? Robert! He nodded. The bank's deadline is in 3 days. I'd appreciate a call before then. You'll get one, Robert said. After Daniel left, Robert walked out to the wheat field. He did this sometimes when he needed to think, walked into the rows until he was surrounded by the green shoots on all sides, the sky overhead vast and pale and indifferent, and just stood there. It was something his father had done, something his grandfather had done, something about standing in the middle of what you'd grown that organized the mind. He thought about Winston Caldwell going through a burning window in January 1930 in Tennessee, and never telling anyone. He thought about the baby. 8 months old, Calvin Mercer, who grew up and had children and grandchildren, and a great-grandson, who was now standing with his whole family's future in a checkbook. He thought about his own son, Marcus, in Austin, 31 years old, 2 kids under 5, a mortgage on a house in a good school district. Marcus had called last week, voice tight with the effort of being casual, and asked again if there was anything he could do. Robert had said no. Robert had said he was handling it. Robert had not been handling it. He thought about what it meant to accept this. He thought about what it cost to refuse it. He stood in the wheat for a long time. He called Marcus that evening. It rang twice, and Marcus picked up the background noise of small children in dinner preparation audible behind his voice. Dad. Everything okay? Something happened today, Robert said. I need to tell you about it. He told him the whole thing. The diner, the conversation, Daniel Mercer, and the story about Winston and the fire. He told it straight through without editorializing. Just the facts in sequence, the way Gerald Caldwell had taught him to report things. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Dad, Marcus finally said. I know. Are you? Marcus stopped. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. Is this real? You've looked into him. I looked him up this afternoon, Robert said. Daniel Mercer, Denver-based real estate developer, Mercer Property Group. His name's been in the Colorado business press for 20 years. He's legitimate, and the story about great-great-grandfather, I can't verify it, Robert said. But I looked at Winston's photographs after he left. His hands. He paused. Left forearm, right hand. There are marks in the photographs. I always thought they were just the way old photographs were. But they're scars. Marcus. They're scars. Another silence. Take the money, Dad. Marcus's voice was thick. Please, take the money. It's not. I know what you're going to say. It's not your pride that matters right now. It's the land. It's what Winston built. It's what Grandpa Gerald built. It's what you built. His voice cracked slightly. My kids are never going to meet their great-great-great-grandfather, but maybe they can stand on his land. Please. Robert sat in the dark kitchen for a long moment after they hung up. Then he picked up his phone and found the number Daniel Mercer had written on a diner napkin and left on the table. He looked at it for a while. He put the phone down. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, something he did maybe 4 times a year, on occasions that warranted it. He sat with it, in the dark, listening to the ceiling fan click on every 3rd rotation, and thought about a man he'd never known, going through a burning window 96 years ago. He called it 9:15. Daniel picked up on the 2nd ring. Okay, Robert said. There was a pause. Okay, Daniel said. But I want conditions, Robert added. This isn't a gift. I'm not going to carry it that way. We'll draw up something. Something that makes it a loan. I don't care if the terms are impossible. I don't care if it takes me 20 years. I want a piece of paper that says I owe you and I'm paying you back. A pause. That's agreeable, Daniel said. And I want to know everything, Robert said. The whole story, from the beginning. Winston, Joseph, Mercer, all of it. Whatever your family has, I want my son to know it. I want his kids to know it. I have letters, Daniel said. From Joseph to Calvin, written when Calvin was old enough to understand them. I have the photograph I told you about. I'll bring everything. Robert drank the last of the bourbon. Be here at 9 tomorrow morning. I'll be there, Daniel said, and Robert, yay. Thank you for not being too proud. Robert almost said something sharp to that, but stopped himself. Because the truth was, it had been close. It had been very close. Don't thank me yet, he said instead. I'm still figuring out how to live with it. That's the most honest thing I've heard in a long time, Daniel said. Daniel arrived at 9 with a worn leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee from Crawford's Diner. He'd apparently found the place acceptable because he'd stopped there on his way out of town. He set the cups on the kitchen table and opened the portfolio. Inside, in plastic protective sleeves, were 4 letters written in a careful cursive on paper that had gone the color of old ivory, and 1 photograph. The photograph showed a young man in overalls, maybe 22 or 23, squinting into bright sunlight outside what appeared to be a sawmill. He was lean-faced, with thick dark hair and a direct expression. Robert picked it up and held it next to his family album, open to the photograph of young Winston. The similarity was unmistakable. Not identical. The photographs showed 2 different men, but the same jaw, the same way of standing, the same direct engagement with the camera, as though it was something to be reckoned with rather than smiled at. Joseph Mercer kept it, Daniel said. He said the man deserved to be remembered by someone. He didn't know Winston's full name until a month after the fire had to ask around, and by then Winston was gone from Harlan's Crossing. So he kept the photograph and told the story instead. Robert set the photographs down side by side. 2 men, 2 families, 1 cold January night, 96 years of consequences spreading out from a single decision. Can I read the letters? They're yours if you want them, Daniel said. Copies of mine. I had them scanned and reprinted on period paper. A preservationist I know did them. The originals are in a climate-controlled storage facility in Denver. But these are identical. Robert put on his reading glasses and read. The first letter was dated October 1944, when Calvin Mercer was 14 years old. Joseph wrote to his son, who was apparently going through a difficult stretch at school, some kind of altercation, and told him the story of the fire, for what the letter implied was not the first time. But he wrote it out in full, carefully, because he wanted Calvin to understand something specific. There are moments when a person can walk away or step forward, and most people will never know which choice you made. The man from the sawmill stepped forward. He did not know us. He did not owe us anything. He simply saw what needed doing and did it. That is the only kind of bravery that matters, not the kind that is witnessed and recorded, but the kind that happens when no one is watching except God. Robert read it twice. The second letter was dated 1962. Calvin to his own eldest son, Thomas. Calvin wrote about the fire again. The way the story apparently resurfaced at key moments in the family's telling of itself. I carry this story not as a debt I cannot pay, but as a compass. When I don't know what the right thing is, I think about a man who went through a burning window in January without stopping to calculate the risk. The calculation was simple. A child needed help. Everything else was secondary. The third letter was shorter, written by Calvin in 1988 to all his children on the occasion of his 60th birthday. He wrote about legacy and what it meant. Near the end, he wrote, "I have tried all my life to be worthy of the extra years I was given. I do not know if I have succeeded, but I know this: when my time comes, I want to be able to say that I paid the gift forward, that I did not spend the life Winston Caldwell gave me on small things." The fourth letter was different. It was from Daniel's mother, Margaret Mercer, written to Daniel in 2019, a year before her death. She had clearly been ill when she wrote it. The handwriting was less steady than her voice, Daniel would later tell Robert, because Margaret had been a woman whose voice was never anything but firm. She wrote about the family history, about Calvin, about the photograph and the letters. And then, near the end, she wrote, "Daniel, I don't know what form it will take or when it will come, but I believe that someday you will have the opportunity and the means to close this circle. When that time comes, don't let pride get in the way, yours or theirs." The Caldwell man who went through that window didn't stop to consider dignity. He just did what was right. Do the same. Robert took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. He sat quietly for a moment. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman," he said. "She was the most direct person I've ever known," Daniel said. "She would have had no patience for a long deliberation about this. She would have just written a check herself." Robert almost smiled. "My wife was like that. You mentioned she's gone. 4 years now." He looked at the letters on the table. "She would have liked these." There was a pause, not uncomfortable. The specific quality of silence that exists when two people who didn't know each other this morning are being honest with each other about loss. "Well," Daniel said, "shall we go to the bank?" The drive to Abilene took 40 minutes. Robert drove his own truck. Daniel followed in his. They didn't convoy ostentatiously, it just worked out that way. 2 vehicles on Route 84, heading east into the morning sun, past flat fields and the occasional cluster of pump jacks, nodding their ancient rhythm. At First Lone Star Bank, they were met by the branch manager, Philip Garrett, a lean, watchful man in his early 50s who had called Robert 3 times in the last 2 weeks and whose name Robert now associated with the specific hollow feeling of dread. Garrett looked at Daniel with the carefully composed neutrality of a banker encountering an unexpected development. The transaction took 45 minutes. Daniel had arrived prepared, the cashier's check already drawn up for the payoff amount, the documentation from his financial institution already in order. Garrett's assistant made copies of everything. Robert signed where he was required to sign. There were moments when the numbers on the paper, $2,347,000 seemed to detach from meaning and become purely abstract, too large to hold in the mind as real. When it was done, Garrett looked at Robert with an expression that might have been relief, or might have been the professional equivalent of having a weight removed. He extended his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, congratulations. The property is clear." Robert shook his hand. His own felt slightly numb. In the parking lot, standing in the April sun between their 2 trucks, Robert turned to Daniel and said the only thing that came to mind, which was, "I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything with it today," Daniel said. "Go home. Walk your land. That's enough for today." But it was not, as it turned out, enough for that day. Because when Robert got home and pulled into his driveway, there was another truck already parked there, a silver Ram, one he recognized, his brother Gene Caldwell's truck. Gene was 54. 4 years younger than Robert, and had left Marston in his 20s to work in the oil industry in Midland. He'd done well by it, comfortable, not wealthy, and had visited the farm maybe twice in the last 5 years. He and Robert had what Robert's son Marcus called a cordial distance, which was a diplomatic way of describing a relationship that had calcified around a series of old grievances that neither of them was inclined to fully excavate. Gene was sitting on the porch steps. He stood when Robert got out of the truck. "I heard," Gene said, by way of greeting. "How did you hear?" "Roy Sayers called Bill Hutchins, who called Linda Pressman, who called my wife." He said it without embarrassment. That was simply how information traveled, and there was no point pretending otherwise. Robert climbed the steps without responding and opened the front door. "Come in. If you're coming, Jenny, came in." They stood in the kitchen, Gene looking around the house with a specific expression of someone who grew up somewhere and is calculating how much has changed. He was broader than Robert, heavier, with their father's jawline and their mother's eyes. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt that said something about a golf tournament. "So it's true," Gene said. "Some stranger paid off the whole thing." "It's true." Gene was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why?" Robert told him the story. Winston, the fire, the Mercer family, the letters. Gene listened with his arms crossed, expressions cycling through skepticism, surprise, and something more complicated that Robert couldn't categorize. When Robert finished, Gene said, "And you trust this guy?" "I checked him out thoroughly. He's legitimate." "That's not what I mean." Gene's voice had an edge to it. "I mean, why didn't he come to me? I'm a Caldwell too. Winston was my great-grandfather too." There it was. Robert looked at his brother. "You don't live here." "Gene, it's still my family's farm." "Is it?" Robert kept his voice flat and even. "Because when I called you 3 years ago, when I was first starting to get into real trouble, when I asked if you could help with even a portion of the first refinancing, you said you couldn't get the liquidity together, which I accepted. And I never asked again." Gene's jaw tightened. "I had my own expenses. I know you did. I'm not holding it against you." And he meant it, more or less. "I'm just saying, you made a choice about how involved you wanted to be in the farm. Daniel Mercer came here because here is where the farm is. This is where the Caldwell land is. This is where it mattered." Gene was quiet. He looked at the kitchen, the old table, the photographs on the wall, the coffee maker that had belonged to their parents. "Dad would have hated this," Gene said finally. "Accepting money from a stranger." "I know," Robert said. "But Dad's not here, and the farm is. I made the call I thought Winston would have made. That landed somewhere." Gene looked at him. "Winston," he said. "You think Winston would have..." "Winston went through a burning building for a stranger," Robert said, without stopping to worry about what people would think of him for doing it. "I think he had a pretty clear sense of what mattered." He paused. "I'm not saying I was comfortable with it. I'm saying I did it. The land is still ours." Gene sat down heavily at the kitchen table. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the afternoon light was lengthening across the wheat field. "I should have come back more," Gene said finally. His voice was different, the edge gone, replaced by something older and less comfortable. "I knew it was going bad. The last few years, I told myself you had it handled. I told you I had it handled," Robert said. "Yeah." Gene looked at the table. "You're stubborn as Dad was. So are you." A moment passed. The ceiling fan clicked on its third rotation. Gene said, "Can I stay a few days?" Robert looked at his brother, this man who had his grandfather's jaw and his mother's eyes and 4 years of distance, and a history of not quite showing up that both of them carried without fully naming it. He thought about Marcus's voice on the phone the night before. "My kids are never going to meet their great-great-great-grandfather, but maybe they can stand on his lawn." "There's room," Robert said. Daniel stayed in Marston longer than one night. He'd planned to move on. There was always somewhere else to be. Some other project in some other state, but something about the farm held him. He told Robert it was the land itself, something about the flat expanse, under the enormous Texas sky that operated on him the way certain music did, opening up interior spaces he usually kept closed for efficiency. He came out to the farm each morning with coffee from Crawford's Diner. He and Robert would walk the fields or sit on the porch and talk about farming, about land, about the specific culture of rural Texas towns that were slowly losing population, about Robert's wife, Patricia, and Daniel's own long marriage and longer divorce, about children and what fathers owed them and what fathers could never repay. Robert found he liked the man. It surprised him. He was not someone who made friends quickly, had never been. But Daniel had a quality of attention that was rare. He listened the way someone did when they genuinely did not know what you were going to say next, and found the not knowing interesting. On the third day, Gene was still there, helping Robert repair the north fence line, something he'd volunteered for, with the energy of a man trying to pay a debt he couldn't quite name. They were 3/4 down stretching wire in the afternoon heat when Daniel drove up. The two men looked at each other for a moment. Robert introduced them. Daniel shook Gene's hand with the same uncomplicated directness he brought to everything. Gene was polite but guarded. The way he was with most people, he hadn't decided to trust yet. They worked together for the rest of the afternoon. By 5 o'clock, the fence was done, and the three of them sat on the tailgate of Robert's truck with cold drinks and the long evening light, turning everything bronze. Gene asked Daniel about his development work. Daniel described a few projects, commercial real estate mainly, some mixed-use urban developments, some agricultural land conservation work he'd gotten into in the last decade because his conscience had started requiring it of him. Agricultural conservation, Gene said. Land trusts, easements, Daniel said. Working with farmers who want to keep their land in agricultural production rather than sell to developers. I set up a foundation for it about 8 years ago, the Mercerland Foundation. He paused. It's not entirely unrelated to why I'm here. Robert looked at him. What does that mean? Daniel turned his drink can in his hands. There's something else I should tell you both. Something I probably should have led with, except that I wasn't sure about the reception. He paused. The farm, the land itself, is something I've been thinking about. Not buying, not owning, but protecting, he explained. The Mercerland Foundation worked with landowners to establish conservation easements, legal agreements that preserved agricultural land from future development in perpetuity, while keeping ownership with the family. Participating farms received a significant payment up front for signing the easement, typically based on the difference between the land's value for development and its value as farmland. For a property the size of the Caldwell farm, that payment, depending on appraisal, could be substantial, high 6 figures, possibly over $1 million. The easement means you can never sell the land for development, Daniel said. It stays farmland, legally, forever. You can still farm it, sell it to another farmer, pass it to your kids. You just can't turn it into a subdivision. Robert and Gene looked at each other. I was never gonna turn it into a subdivision, Robert said. I know, Daniel said, but this makes that legally permanent, and it provides some financial cushion for operating costs, equipment, whatever you need. He looked at Robert steadily. This isn't the debt repayment. That's separate. This is the foundation's work. Farms like this one are exactly what we exist to protect. Gene, who had been listening with increasing attention, said, "Why didn't you mention this before? When you first came here?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "Because I wasn't sure if the first thing would be accepted," he said, "and I didn't want it to look like a package deal, like the debt payoff was conditional on the easement or something. It's not. They're completely separate. I paid the debt because of Winston. The easement conversation would be happening regardless, because your farm qualifies and your situation is exactly the kind of thing the foundation was built for." He paused, but I'll admit, my mother's voice was in my head. She'd have told me to say all of it up front. I was managing it. That was probably wrong. The frankness of the admission was disarming. Robert appreciated it. I'd need a lawyer to look at anything like that, Robert said. Of course. There's no timeline pressure on this one. Daniel finished his drink. Just put it in the back of your mind for now. That night, with Jean asleep in the spare room, Robert sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote out the numbers. The debt was gone. The farm was clear. He still had operating costs, significant ones, and equipment that was aging, and a season already in progress that would require careful management. He was not saved. He was no longer drowning, which was different. He wrote down what he needed for the rest of the growing season. He wrote down what repairs were most urgent. He wrote down what a good harvest might generate and what a mediocre harvest would mean. He was deep in this calculation when his phone rang. It was Marcus. Dad, Stephanie's parents want to know if we can come for Memorial Day weekend. Stephanie was Marcus's wife. I said I'd check. Of course. Come for the whole weekend. A pause. How are you doing? Like, actually, complicated, Robert said. But better. The man Mercer, have you talked to him more? He's still here. Actually, he's been helping with some things on the property. A longer pause. He's still there. He's staying at the motel. But he comes by in the mornings. Robert considered how to characterize it. I think he needed this as much as I did. In a different way, he's been carrying that story his whole life. Closing the circle matters to him. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, is he okay? Is he a good person? Robert thought about it. About the letter from Daniel's mother. About the way Daniel worked fence line without being asked and listened without performing. About the frankness with which he'd admitted to managing the information about the easement. Yeah, he said. I think he is. Good. A beat? I looked him up. Robert almost smiled. And his foundation has done a lot of good work. There's a profile of him in some Colorado business magazine from a few years ago. He seemed like someone who actually means what he does. He does, Robert said. 4 days after the debt was paid, something Robert had not expected happened. He was in the equipment shed, working on the tractor, a mundane task, replacing a hydraulic line. When Dottie Pierce from Crawford's Diner pulled up in her car, she got out carrying a covered dish. I heard everything came out okay, she said. Not preamble, not ceremony. I made a King Ranch cast. Robert stood up from the tractor. Dottie, you didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. She handed in the dish with the matter-of-factness of a woman who expressed affection through cooking and saw no reason to apologize for it. You've been coming to that counter for 30 years. Robert Caldwell. I was not going to sit by and not say something. He took the casserole. He stood there holding it. Thank you, he said. How are you doing? Not the land. He thought about it. Really thought about it. Because Dottie was not someone you gave a reflexive answer to. Trying to figure out what I did to deserve any of it, he said. The good or the bad. Any of it. Dottie looked at him for a moment, with the particular steadiness of someone who had served coffee to the same people through 4 decades of their lives. You didn't do anything to deserve the bad, she said. Drought isn't a moral failure. Robert, and as for the rest of it, she looked out at the land. Your great-grandfather did something right in 1930, and it came back around. That's not mysterious. That's just how it works, sometimes. He nodded. His jaw was tight. Come by for breakfast tomorrow, she said. I'll have the eggs ready. She got in her car and drove away. But not everything resolved quietly. On the 5th day, while Daniel and Robert were walking the south field checking on the wheat, a white SUV pulled up to the house. Robert recognized it immediately. Patricia Milan, a real estate agent who had been circling the property for 2 years on behalf of an agricultural corporation based in Dallas. She'd made 3 offers, each slightly above market. Each declined. She was not accustomed to being declined. She was 45, polished, and wore the specific kind of smile that was also a measurement. Robert, she said, coming across the yard. I heard the bank situation resolved. She made it sound like a weather report. I've been authorized to make a new offer on the property. Still not interested, Robert said. This offer is significantly above our previous ones. She named a number. It was a large number. The corporation has expanded their acquisition targets in the region. They're prepared to move quickly. I said I'm not interested. She looked at Daniel with the measuring smile. Is this a partner or... This is my property, Robert said, not raising his voice. And it's not for sale. Not to a corporation. Not to anyone. He paused. I'm going to be setting up a conservation easement on it, which means it'll be off the table permanently, so you can let your clients know they can stop calling. Patricia's smile recalibrated. A conservation easement is a very significant financial decision to make quickly. Patricia, Robert said, with the patient finality of a man who has made up his mind, I appreciate you coming out. I mean that. But this conversation is over. She looked at him for a moment, and then something shifted in her expression. Not defeat exactly, but a recognition. She nodded, got back in the SUV, and left. Daniel watched the SUV until it cleared the drive. "You're sure about the easement?" he said. "You haven't had the lawyer look at it yet." "I'm sure about what I'm not doing," Robert said. "The easement details I'll look at carefully. But that," he nodded toward the road where the SUV had gone. "That answer is the same whether I sign the easement or not." Daniel nodded. Fair enough. They kept walking. That night, Jean found Robert on the porch. He sat in the other chair, Patricia's chair, the one that had been empty for 4 years, and they sat in silence for a while, looking at the dark fields. "I'm going back to Midland tomorrow," Jean said. "Okay. I want to come back more." "I mean that." He paused. "I know I've said versions of that before." "You have." Jean was quiet. Then, "Dad put it all on you." "The whole thing, from the beginning. You were the one who stayed. You were the one who got the keys. You were the one who was supposed to carry everything." He looked at his hands. "I left and told myself it was the right choice for my life. And it was. But I think I also let it become a reason to not show up here. Like if I stayed away, the weight of it wasn't my problem. It was more than Jean had said about it in their entire adult lives." Robert listened without moving. "I want to be part of this now," Jean said. "Whatever that looks like. I'm not going to pretend I can farm. But I can help with costs sometimes. I can show up. I can make sure Marcus and his kids know what this land is." He stopped. "If that's okay with you." Robert looked out at the dark wheat field. The night insects were going, and somewhere down the fence line, the mockingbird was running through someone else's songs. "It's okay with me," he said. Memorial Day weekend arrived with a particular generosity of late May in West Texas. Not yet the brutal heat of summer, the air still carrying the memory of spring, the fields green and tall and close to harvest. Marcus arrived on Friday afternoon with Stephanie and the kids Owen, who was 4, and Clara, who was just past 2. They came in a packed SUV with a portable crib and enough luggage to suggest a siege, and Clara cried for the first 20 minutes because the drive had been too long, and then immediately stopped crying and attached herself to Robert's leg with the cheerful permanence of a barnacle. Robert looked down at this small person, gripping his jeans, and felt something move through his chest that had no adequate name. Jean drove in from Midland on Saturday morning, and Daniel, who had finally checked out of the Pineview Motel and was technically on his way back to Denver, made one last detour to the farm when Robert called and told him the family was gathering. He arrived with a box of pastries from a bakery in Abilene and the worn leather portfolio under his arm. They spent Saturday morning on the porch and in the yard, coffee and pastries, and the unhurried conversation of people who are still getting to know each other across a long, complicated history. Stephanie, who taught middle school English in Austin and had the specific capability of making anyone feel immediately comfortable, talked with Daniel about the land conservation work as though she'd been interested in it her whole life. Jean played a long, patient game of catch, with Owen using a foam ball that Owen threw in completely unpredictable directions. Clara sat on the porch steps and arranged pieces of gravel in lines, with the focused intensity of someone solving an important problem. Robert watched all of it from the corner of his eye while he and Marcus walked the south field. The wheat was close. Another 10 days to 2 weeks, and it would be ready. Robert walked the rows with his hand, trailing through the tops of the stalks, feeling the weight of the heads, reading the color the way his father had taught him and his grandfather had taught his father. "It looks good," Marcus said. "It is good," Robert said. "Better than last year? Better than the year before?" He paused. The rain came right this spring. Marcus woke beside him, hands in his pockets, the sun warm on their backs. "Dad," he said, "can I say something without you shutting it down? Depends what it is." "I'm proud of you." He said it simply, not as performance. "For the choice you made, for calling me that night, for letting someone help." Robert kept walking. The wheat whispered around them. "It wasn't easy," he said. "I know. That's why I'm saying it." They walked in silence for a while. A red-tailed hawk circled high overhead, riding a thermal with magnificent indifference to everything below. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Marcus said. "What do you mean?" "I mean the farm. Long term." He was choosing his words with care. "Stephanie and I have been talking about whether there's a world where we come back here eventually. Not soon. The kids are young. Her job is in Austin. We have the house. But eventually." He looked at his father. "I don't want this to be the generation where it ends." "The farm? The family here?" Robert stopped walking. He turned to look at his son, 31 years old. His mother's eyes and his grandfather's jaw, and something of his own mixed in that Robert couldn't fully trace. A man who had his own life, his own family, his own choices to make. "You'd want that," Robert said. "Truly. Not because you feel obligated." "Dad!" Marcus met his eyes. "I brought my kids here so they could stand on this ground. That's not obligation. That's something else." Robert looked at the wheat, green and gold in the morning light, moving in the slow May wind. He thought about Winston Caldwell, 23 years old, walking home from a late shift on a January night in Tennessee, seeing a glow 3 blocks away and starting to run. Not calculating, not deliberating, just moving toward what needed doing. He thought about the baby in the burning house who grew up to be Calvin Mercer, who had 6 children and 14 grandchildren and a great-grandson, who wrote a check for $2.3 million without asking for anything in return. He thought about cause and effect, how they stretched across generations in ways that no one, in the moment of acting, could possibly foresee. How a man going through a window in 1930 was standing here, in this wheat field, in this moment in the form of everything that had followed. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. That afternoon, Daniel spread the contents of the leather portfolio on the kitchen table for the whole family. The letters, the photographs. The story in full, told to Marcus and Stephanie and Jean all together, with Clara asleep on the couch and Owen on the floor with a set of toy trucks that he drove around with narrative commentary. Marcus read Joseph's letter to young Calvin, the one about going through the window, about the only bravery that matters, being the kind that happens when no one is watching. He read it twice. When he put it down, his jaw was tight, and he looked at the ceiling for a moment with the particular expression of a man preventing himself from crying in a room full of people. Stephanie put her hand over his. Jean picked up the photograph of Winston and held it for a long time. He set it down next to Daniel's family photograph, the one Joseph Mercer had kept of the young man from the sawmill. "Same jaw," Jean said. "Same jaw," Robert agreed. Daniel told them about Calvin, the life he'd lived, the family he'd built, the way the story had been carried through each generation like a compass bearing. He told them about his mother, Margaret, and the letter she'd written in 2019, the instructions she'd given him. Don't let pride get in the way, yours or theirs. Just do what's right. When everything had been said and the table was quiet, Stephanie looked up and said, "Can we make copies of these? For our family records?" Daniel smiled. "A real one, without reservation. They're already yours," he said. "I brought duplicates." He reached into the portfolio and produced a second set, neatly organized, identical to the first. I had them made before I came. I was hoping to be able to give them to you. He slid them across the table to Robert. Robert looked at the copies, at the careful cursive of Joseph Mercer's letters, at the faces of men who had lived and acted and set things in motion without knowing what they were setting in motion. "Thank you," he said. It was insufficient, but it was what he had. "Thank Winston," Daniel said. On Sunday morning, Robert woke at 4:47 again. He lay there for a moment in the old habit, waiting for the dread that had been his companion every morning for the last 2 years, that hollow, descending weight that arrived before full consciousness and set the tone for the day. It didn't come. He lay in the quiet and listened to the house breathe. Donde how? He could hear the small sounds of Owen beginning to wake up, a murmur, a creak of the portable bed, then quiet again. The ceiling fan clicked on every third rotation. The mockingbird was not yet up. He got up, put on his boots, and went to the kitchen. He put the coffee on and stood at the back door and looked out at the farm in the pre-dawn dark. The barn, the silo, the equipment shed, the south field where the wheat was close to ready, invisible now but present, alive, doing what wheat did in the dark, continuing, persisting, following its nature toward the light. He thought about the conversation with Marcus in the wheat rows. I don't want this to be the generation where it ends. He thought about it not as a promise or a plan, but as a beginning of a direction. The way a compass bearing was not a destination, but an orientation. It could still go wrong in 100 ways. Marcus's life might take him elsewhere. The farm might hit another rough stretch. The land itself, the climate, the market, none of it was guaranteed. But the land was still his. That was the foundation. He poured his coffee and went to the kitchen table and sat down. The photo albums were still out from the previous afternoon. He opened the photograph of Winston, old now, late in his life, seated on porch steps with young Gerald on his knee, the burned hands visible on his grandson's small shoulders. He'd looked up Harlan's Crossing, Tennessee, on his laptop 2 nights ago. It was a real place, smaller now than it had been. Population barely 1,000, but still there. Still a dot on the map. He'd looked at it on satellite view. The green hills of eastern Tennessee, so different from the flat caliche hardpan of West Texas. He'd tried to imagine a 20th man leaving that green and coming to this flat, arid expanse with $40 and a mule and starting over. He thought he understood now why Winston had never talked about the fire. Not because it was something to be hidden, but because it had belonged to the Mercers, their story to tell, their compass bearing to carry. Winston had done his part and walked away and built something new. He'd left the story with the people whose lives it had shaped most directly. It had come back anyway. 96 years later, it had found its way back. Robert sat with his coffee in the quiet kitchen and looked at his great-grandfather's face and thought about what kind of man it took to live a life like that, to do the right thing and then simply continue, without ceremony, without credit, building a farm in a new land, raising a son, planting wheat, a man who trusted that good acts had their own gravity, that they moved through time according to rules that human accounting couldn't track. He was not sure he was that kind of man. He was not sure anyone was, entirely, but he thought he could try to be more of it than he had been. After breakfast, pancakes and eggs, made by Stephanie, who had commandeered the kitchen with cheerful authority, they all went outside. No particular agenda. Owen wanted to see the cows, and Robert explained there weren't any cows at the moment, and Owen accepted this with the philosophical adaptability of 4-year-olds and immediately asked to see something else. Clara had discovered a stick of interesting dimensions and was carrying it everywhere she went with the solemn dedication of someone who had found the correct stick at last. They walked to the south field and stood at the edge of it. The wheat was there in the May morning, tall and gold green and full, the heads heavy and beginning to tip slightly the way they did when they were close, bowing almost imperceptibly toward the ground as though in preparation. When do you cut it, Marcus Zasket? Week and a half, Robert said. Maybe 10 days. I'll watch the moisture content. I want to be here for that, Marcus said. If we can work it out. We can work it out. Owen had found the edge of the field and was running his small hands along the tops of the wheat stalks the way children did when confronted with something that invited touching, pulling the stalks and watching them spring back. "Gentle," Stephanie told him. "It's okay," Robert said. "Wheat's tougher than it looks." He watched his grandson interact with the wheat and thought about great-grandchildren who didn't exist yet, who might one day stand in this same field. He thought about Marcus and Stephanie's unspoken plan, the slow maybe of coming back. He thought about the easement he was going to sign. His lawyer had looked it over, called it solid, said it was a remarkable arrangement. That signature would make permanent what he already felt to be true. This land was not a commodity. It was a continuation. Daniel was standing slightly apart, looking out over the field with that particular expression Robert had come to recognize. The Huan was part satisfaction and part something harder to name. Robert walked over to him. "You heading out today?" Robert asked. "After lunch," Daniel said. "I've been away from work too long. My office is sending increasingly concerned emails." A pause. "My assistant is very politely implying that I may have lost my mind. Have you—" Daniel looked at the field. "I found something I wasn't looking for," he said. "That happens. Sometimes you go looking for one thing and you find something that matters more." He paused. "I came here to close a circle. I think instead I found one that was already open." Robert looked at him. "You'll come back," Robert said. It was not quite a question. "I will," Daniel said. "Not with performance, not with the automatic warmth of social obligation. Simple and direct. Harvest. If you'll have me, I want to see what it looks like when it comes in." "It looks like the end of a long year," Robert said. "And the beginning of another one." They had lunch on the porch, sandwiches, and sweet tea. Dottie Pierce's leftover King Ranch store-bought pie that Marcus had brought from Austin. They ate in the comfortable disorder of a family that had recently remembered what it was. Jean helped Owen build a structure out of sticks and rocks in the yard, some kind of fort or castle or defensive installation whose precise military purpose was unclear but deeply serious to Owen. Clara sat on the porch step and arranged gravel again with her stick, narrating something in a language that was half English and half not yet. Stephanie found the old photograph albums and sat quietly, going through them on the porch swing with the attentiveness of someone reading something important. She stopped at the photograph of Winston. "He looks like Marcus," she said. Robert looked. He'd seen it before. The jaw, the way of standing. But coming from Stephanie, who was outside the family and therefore without the selective blindness that familiarity brought, it landed differently. "He does," Robert said. She looked at the photograph for a moment longer, then looked up at Marcus, who was laughing at something Owen's fort had done. Collapsed, probably, and then back at the photograph. "He'll know about him," she said. "Owen, we'll tell him the whole story." "Yes," Robert said. "We will." Daniel left at 2 in the afternoon. He loaded his overnight bag into the blue Ford truck, went around and shook hands with Jean, hugged Stephanie with the slightly formal warmth of someone who was not yet family, but was on the edge of something, crouched down to Owen's level, and said something that made Owen burst into delighted laughter, and then stood up and looked at Robert. They shook hands. It lasted a moment longer than a standard handshake. Not dramatic. Just two men, acknowledging something that didn't have a clean word for it. A connection that had been forged in documents, and kitchens and wheat fields across 5 days, grounded in a story that was 96 years old and still generating. "Thank you," Robert said, "for all of it." "Thank you for not being too proud," Daniel said. The same thing he'd said on the phone. And this time Robert heard it differently. Not as commentary on pride, but as genuine gratitude. Because Daniel had needed this too. Needed to close what his grandfather had carried. Needed to know that the gift of a life well lived had landed somewhere and taken root. Daniel got in the truck. He backed out of the driveway slowly, stopped at the road, and Robert raised a hand. Daniel raised a hand in return. Then he turned north on Route 84 and was gone. That evening, after Marcus and Stephanie had put the kids to bed in the spare room, Owen on the fold-out cot, Clara in the portable crib, and Gene had gone out to sit in his truck and make phone calls back to Midland, Robert sat alone on the porch in the same chair he'd always sat in. The night sky over West Texas did what it did when you let yourself look at it properly. Opened up into something enormous and indifferent and strangely comforting, a reminder of scale that made human troubles the correct size. Again, the wheat field was dark, but he could feel it there. The way you could feel the presence of something alive and growing, even when you couldn't see it. In 10 days, it would be ready. The combine, his combine, which no longer had a lien on it, which he'd confirmed in writing from the bank, would go through it in 2 days of long, satisfying labor. He'd have the yield numbers by the end of the week. He'd pay his operating costs. He'd start making the first small payment on the loan agreement he and Daniel had drawn up token amounts. Really, for now. But the principle mattered. He was paying it back on his own terms, in his own time. But paying it back. The conservation easement paperwork was on the kitchen table, his lawyer's notes in the margins, a pen next to it. He'd sign it tomorrow morning. The land would be farmland in perpetuity. No corporation from Dallas, no developer, no future financial crisis of any kind could change what the land was for. He thought about the mockingbird. It wasn't singing tonight. Too late, too dark, even for a creature that borrowed other songs. He thought about what his father had said. They sing other bird songs, but mean every note of it. He thought about what it meant to carry forward what other people had built. Not just the physical land, the brick and wire and topsoil, but the quality of character that had built it, the willingness to go through the window, to do what needed doing without calculating credit, to trust that good acts had a gravity of their own. He was not sure he'd always lived up to that. He'd been proud in ways that had cost him, cost his relationship with Gene, cost himself the chance to ask for help before the help became crisis. He'd carried the weight of the farm as a personal identity rather than a family inheritance, which had made him brittle when flexibility was needed. He knew that now. He was 58 years old, and he knew it now, which was perhaps the only schedule on which some knowledge could arrive. Inside the house, he could hear the small sounds of his family, the creak of the floorboard in the hall that was Marcus going to check on the kids, the murmur of Gene's voice on the porch below, Stephanie's quiet laugh from the spare room, the ordinary music of people under the same roof. Robert leaned back in his chair and looked at the stars. The farm was still there. The wheat was growing. His son wanted to come back. His brother had showed up and meant it. A stranger had come out of the past and paid a debt that was older than money, and in doing so, had given back not just the land, but something harder to quantify, the proof that what you did in one life could reach forward and touch lives you'd never imagined, in ways you'd never predicted, long after you were gone. Winston Caldwell had gone through a window in January 1930 and never told anyone. Robert Caldwell sat on his porch in May 2026 and felt the full weight and warmth of it land on him across a century. And he was grateful for the land, for the family, for the stranger who had found his way here, for the mockingbird that sang other bird songs and meant every note, for the wheat that was nearly ready, for the morning that would come again. He sat there until Gene came up and joined him, and they sat together in the dark the way brothers could, when enough of the old distance had been cleared, not talking much, just present on the land their great-grandfather had built under the enormous and generous West Texas sky. And somewhere out beyond the dark fence line, the wheat grew on.